today's speakers as well, and I'm inspired by everything everyone's been sharing in the chat. My name's Layla. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a junior at Tufts School of Arts and Sciences, studying colonialism studies and environmental studies. And this semester, I've spent interning at New Entry Sustainable Farming Project, doing farm work and researching Indigenous histories, and I'll be one of the co-facilitators today along with Beth.
Awesome. I'm Beth, and I am a second-year master's student at Tufts Friedman School of Nutrition and Policy, and I'm specializing in agriculture, food, and environment, and I also work at New Entry Farm doing institutional sales.
Amazing. We want to start by thanking the Tisch College of Civic Life, Building Audacity, New Entry Sustainable Farming Project, and Tufts Food Rescue Collaborative for making this event possible. We will start today with a land acknowledgement from Hannah from Indigenous Students Organization at Tufts, then a brief history of Indigenous peoples at New Entry and Black land loss throughout New England before moving into the panel portion of the event. If you have questions throughout the event, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be starting with the pre-prepared questions before moving into audience questions. Again, thank you all so much for joining us, and Hannah, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Norton, and I am a sophomore in the School of Engineering. I use the She series. I am First Nation Mohawk and am part of the Indigenous Students Organization at Tufts. We would like to start this event with a land acknowledgement of the Indigenous peoples of this region and their ancestral lands on which Tufts University sits today. It is important to acknowledge that Tufts University resides on the lands of the Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and Mashpee Wampanoag tribal nations. We acknowledge these tribal nations as the past, present, and future stewards of this land. It's important to understand the history of displacement and genocide of these peoples, which has led us to this land today. We make this acknowledgement as a way to pay respect to the Indigenous peoples on whose land we are guests. Yawen, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. And we also want to emphasize, like she just shared, that these land acknowledgements don't exist in a past tense or historical context. Rather, colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. So New Entry, located in Beverly, Massachusetts, occupies Massachusetts, Pennacook, and Merrimack land. The Massachusetts tribal nation has existed for years beyond counting in prehistoric times and continues a well-documented existence into historic and modern times. The Pennacook, sometimes called Pawtucket and Merrimack, were an Algonquin-speaking tribe that were closely related to the Abenaki. Their name comes from the Abenaki word Pennacook, meaning at the bottom of the hill. Wenham Lake, which borders New Entry, lies in the traditional lands of the Agawam people. The Agawam people recognize tribal ownership of the eastern part of what is now Essex County, Massachusetts. Those lands were seized by the English in a quitclaim deed from Chief Mascomet to John Winthrop. This forced seizure of land is a tool of broader settler colonialism as disease continued to ravage the remaining Agawam throughout the 1600s. John Winthrop, a colonizer of these lands, was a slave owner, and his name and money continues to be a presence on Tufts Medford Somerville campus. We also want to acknowledge that Tufts University sits on the grounds of a former plantation known as 10 Hills Farm. This, combined with Charles Tufts' own ties with slave labor, means that Tufts University is implicated in the darkest injustices of America's past that have yet to escape the reality of the present. Both New Entry and Tufts are complicit in these violent histories. Thank you.
Thanks, Layla. So along with the settler colonial history that Layla was just discussing, there's also the history of Black land loss throughout the country and in New England. I'm going to preface this section by saying that I, as a white woman, this is not my personal experience, and I'm absolutely not an expert in this field. But understanding and learning these histories are imperative to understanding Tufts' role in this and reparations going forward. So this map, which you can see right now, excuse me, shows the wealth denied through Black land loss in the US. So the darkest shade of red shows $1 to $4 billion lost, and the green is on the other end at $0 to $37 million gained. I'm sorry, the first was $1 to $4 billion. So as you can see, the denial of wealth has occurred across the country, but is most concentrated in the South, but it's definitely not exclusive to the South. Massachusetts has counties that have up to $50 million of wealth denied to Black landowners. Leah Penniman from Soulfire Farm, an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm that many of you may be familiar with, is quoted saying that 98% white landowners currently control between 95 to 98% of the farmland in the US and nearly 100% in the Northeast. So this isn't just by chance. There are historical and systematic forces of racism that have led to this statistic. Beginning with the institution of slavery in the US, going into the Civil War, where people who were formerly enslaved were promised 40 acres and a mule. Andrew Johnson went on to reverse the proclamation, and almost all the land was given back to its previous white owners. The Homestead Act of 1862, which allowed US citizens to claim 160 acres of land if they, quote, improved and cultivated it, also excluded Black Americans. The most recent case of Black land loss in the US is demonstrated in the lawsuit of Pigford versus Glickman in 1999. This class action lawsuit filed against the USDA was on the grounds of discrimination against Black farmers in farm loans and assistance that the agency distributed from 1981 to 1996. The settlement has allotted $2 billion to more than 73,000 farmers, making it the largest civil rights settlement to date. The largest and still ongoing contributor to Black agricultural land loss in the US is the issue of heirs property, as the legal system systematically disenfranchised and continues to disenfranchise Black landowners. Systematic racism has shaped our current food system, and land reparations are imperative moving forward. Many groups are already doing this work, such as the local Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. With this extremely brief history, we're going to transition into our panel where we'll expand upon how we can make change going forward.
Thank you so much, Beth, for that history. Now we'll introduce our speakers, and we ask that they introduce themselves with their preferred pronouns as well, if comfortable. Our first speakers are Siona and Margaret. Siona is originally from Cameroon and graduated from the New Entry Farming Training Program in 2007. Farming since she was a child, learning to farm in New England, Siona faced a slew of barriers. However, now is growing tomatoes, eggplants, collard greens, and cabbage. And outside of growing in the planting process itself, Siona participates in the New Entry Food Hub. And we have Margaret as well. Margaret is originally from Kenya and graduated from the New Entry program in 2016 and found out about New Entry through Siona. Our question for both of you is, how did you get into farming in New England, and what barriers and opportunities have you faced, and how have you remained connected to community and home? Whenever you're ready. I think you might be still muted if you're able to unmute.
Okay. All right. So I came here when I was just like moving, but because I have the interest in farming, when I saw the New Entry sign, so I just went there and I asked them if they can look for me a farmland. So they say, okay, if I can take the class, they'll look for me a place to start. So I was excited and I started farming until today. So the good thing is they help me too to look for customers. They have a group of CSAs that they take the produce that we farm. So that one is the good thing that I think they're doing for us. So we are so appreciative for that. But the problem is we lack the resources. Like sometimes we don't have a greenhouse that we can start our own seedlings. So that is our main problem. And we don't have equipment. Sometimes we need to plant things early, But then when we're going to like look for somebody to come and help us to plow, before the plow, the season is over, so we plant late sometimes. So that's one of the problems that we're having. Anything to add on top?
I thank substantive farming, and I thank Fiona for introducing me, because she told me some stuff because I was missing back home. Now I feel happy, and also we don't have a problem. The substantive farming has helped us until still. When we plant beans, they buy from us. Apart from what Fiona said about like having a greenhouse and also water, because even they don't turn on the water early for us. So at least we appreciate if we get help, like although we would like if we get like greenhouses to be planting around the year. Like now we miss farming. Yeah, because it's the end of the season. Thank you so much. Are we still connected? Yes. Yes, okay.
Thank you so much. And a bonus too on the panel. Amazing.
Yeah.
Our next question is for Kirill. Kirill is a fourth-year Tufts University student majoring in environmental studies with a concentration in food systems, nutrition, and the environment, with a second major in anthropology. They are fascinated by the complexities of the global food system with specific interests in Black and Indigenous food geographies, cultural studies, agroecology, as well as sustainable food waste management. Through their academic and food system work, Kirill has nurtured a commitment to rebuilding just and equitable food systems through community-based partnership and development, organizing food media and storytelling. Thank you so much for joining us. Our question to you is, how does food security relate to food justice? And how does this play a role in your work through the Tufts Food Rescue Collaborative?
Hi, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Layla. I'm really excited to be here. And that is obviously such a loaded question and is connected with the title of this panel in a very crucial way. So my definition of food justice, and as I've learned it through school and also the thinkers, farmers, and like food systems practitioners that I follow, would iterate that food justice emphasizes like community autonomy, and also has a really strong hold in labor justice. So that is sort of the conception of food justice that I have. And the work that I do for Tufts Food Rescue is mainly food security based. So Tufts Food Rescue, the collaborative, which includes two branches of food rescue operations, one on campus, and I'm a coordinator for the off-campus branch, which Layla has volunteered with and is an amazing volunteer. We deliver and transport food from Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, grocery stores in the greater Boston area, and deliver them to our community partners, which are a variety of places, including like meal centers at churches, for example, or food pantries. So that is like the nature of our work, which is far more food security focused than it is food justice or racial justice focused. But I do see food rescue and the redistribution of food as an important and necessary part of improving the food security of people who are low income and do not have access to like food like regularly and consistently, and food that is affordable. So thinking a lot about dismantling and the fundamentally racist and inequitable food system is part of food justice work and is related to the work we do at Food Rescue, in that we're working with our community partners and we're thinking a lot about how to deepen those relationships and make food rescue that like of redistributing food, which is a band-aid solution to a much larger problem, as effective and place-based as possible. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, and I'm excited to talk more about that tonight. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Creel. So our next panelist is Nakia Navarro. As self-titled, is the lead troublemaker of Building Audacity. Founded with the exclusive purpose to increase youth power, Building Audacity's mission is to support youth-led change-making and provide resources to adults interested in creating inclusive, youth-focused learning spaces. Currently, Building Audacity is partnering with New Entry to deliver fresh produce and groceries into the greater Boston community. And so Nakia, just if you could introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns, and then really quickly, our question for you is, how does the community guide your work at Building Audacity, and how do you build relationships with the folks you work with?
Hi, everyone. So dope to see all of your amazing and beautiful faces. Thank you, Beth, for that intro. Nakia Navarro, she, her, hers. And just really pleased and excited to be here for this dope conversation. So first, that's that. Secondly, at Building Audacity, we sit in the Black radical tradition. And so what that looks like, it means that we listen to our community before we make any moves. We don't suffer from white saviorism at all, meaning that we do not think that we know what's best for our community. And we truly try our best to hold our community in a transparent nature, right? And so what that looks like is listening, right? So we, again, don't move unless folks in our community say, you know what, this is a problem and we need to do something with it, right? So for example, how we even got into our food program was that the youth that we hold space with literally said, hey, listen, I don't know how I'm going to get to this school. I understand that, yeah, schools are closed for COVID, but the city is on a Saturday schedule, and this was the time before the extra $600 payments were coming out, as well as the rent moratorium. So my grandma is trying to figure out how we're going to pay this rent when she can't actually get into the building in which she works. So there's no way possible I'm going to the school to wait in line to risk getting COVID to get a lunch that actually is not even delicious. I'm all set. And so we said, don't threaten us with a good time. We can deliver it. And so what started as 6 families quickly ended up to over 500 families with 350 on the waiting list. And so we have amazing volunteers, some of which are on the meeting tonight, who come pick up groceries and deliver. And we try our best for those products to be culturally appropriate, right? So we're not delivering mashed potatoes to the hood. No, thank you. We want yucca and all of these other things. And how we know that is, again, we ask, right? So we don't make any moves unless our folks, and that's folks with an X, right, say things like, you know, this is what we really need. And we lean in, we try to use our network, our privilege, anything possible to make this thing happen. So that's how we move at Building Audacity.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Nakia. That was really energizing. So our next panelist is Kevin Cody, who's the Farmer Training Program Manager at New Entry, where he develops pathways to generate and sustain new and beginning farmers. With a background in sustainable food systems education, his role at New Entry includes overseeing grants, developing curriculum, building strategic regional partnerships, and providing direct technical assistance to participants and instruction in courses on food systems, crop production, and business planning. So again, Kevin, if you could introduce yourself and your pronouns, and then our question for you is, what infrastructure makes your work around food access at New Entry possible? And what gaps do you see in general? And how can Tufts as an institution better meet you and your community's needs?
Right on. Thanks, Beth. That was a great introduction. Well, my name is Kevin Cody, he, him pronouns. And I've been thinking about this question a little bit. And first, like, hey, Siona. Hey, Margaret. Nice to see you guys. And Nakia too. How's it going? So I'm really thrilled to be here and part of this panel. It's really a great mix of folks. when I'm thinking about infrastructure and some of the work that we do at New Entry, which is centered around beginning farmers and really doing everything we can to support beginning farmers as they get started and as they continue on in their operations, access to land becomes kind of first and foremost. And I think, you know, the land acknowledgements at the beginning were a great way of, I think, tying the land that we have now, that we occupy at New Entry, to the long history that relates to the food injustice that we're continuing to experience. And I think that some of the challenges around access to land are legacies, right, of this kind of long history. So as far as infrastructure, and I'm thinking about infrastructure in regards to New Entry and the work that we do, our access to land, to equipment, and to the food hub, for example, that we operate is really critical to the success of the farmers that we work with. The work around beginning farmers, I think, is pretty clear that there's a whole host of things that folks need in order to be successful. Land is just one piece of that. Access to resources, like Sienna and Margaret were also mentioning, whether that's a greenhouse or a tractor, or the money to buy a greenhouse and a tractor, are also a big piece of the puzzle that we try to address at New Entry. So I think your other question may be around Tufts. Could you say that question again? Actually, I just want to make sure I'm kind of hearing it right.
Yeah, sorry. What gaps do you see in general, and how can Tufts as an institution better meet you and your community's needs?
Yeah, so this is for everyone on the call, I think, too, could benefit from knowing that New Entry Sustainable Farming Project is a program of Tufts University and Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy specifically. And I think, you know, there's a number of different ways that we sort of interact with Tufts. We're a self-funded program. I'll say that to start, in the sense that we basically have to earn our own grant money, et cetera. And I think, you know, as an organization that is self-funded and largely grant funded, one thing that I'm interested in seeing more of throughout the state, and not just with Tufts, and this is kind of a broader issue around organizations like ours, is that state-based extension services often took the space or occupied the space of what farmer training organizations like New Entry do. And a lot of those extension services were funded in part through state funding that's no longer there. And so what we see now is organizations like New Entry basically chasing after the same grants that extension services are going after. And I think just in general, there could be a greater emphasis from policymakers at the state and federal level on things like farmer training, which there is some, but not nearly as much as I think there could be, which would dramatically help us do our work. So we're not having to essentially compete for funding for those same institutions that were at one point state funded, but now because of a lack of funding in their budget, means that we're all kind of going after the same pools of money to do the work that we do. The other thing I'll mention here too is just that not so much of a gap in the resources, but one of the resources I think that is hugely valuable to our work are folks like Beth and Layla who are putting this event on. We benefit tremendously from the support of students at Tufts, not just in the work that they help us do to support our mission, but also in sort of driving an agenda of progressive change that I think some organizations struggle to always get on board with, in part because there's just so many kind of obstacles to organizational change. And having students from the university be a part of our organization has really, I think, pushed us in some really great directions. And so it's not so much a gap in the resources or what we'd like to see more of, but I think that those are a couple of things that come to mind in thinking about our relationship to the university and to the broader sort of structures that fund the work that organizations like ours are doing across the country.
Amazing, thank you. That was some really helpful context too, in understanding kind broader things. Next, we want to open up that question to Kirill and Nakia. And just to refresh, the question was, what infrastructure makes your work around food access at Tufts Food Rescue Collaborative and at Building Audacity possible? And in what gaps do you see in general? And specifically, how can Tufts as an institution better meet your and your community needs? Thank you.
Nakia, would you like to start?
Sure. So in this year of 2020, all of a sudden my Black Life Matters. And so what that means is that I'm able to get funds all of a sudden. Organizers, frontline folks who have been doing this work for quite some time are now able to actually apply to bigger foundations like a Nellie Mae, Blue Cross Blue Shield, et cetera, right? Because they are actually saying things like, oh, we got to figure out how to get dollars to the front lines because of the lives lost of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and how they've actually made it to the front, right? Though I think all of us on this panel, as well as in this room, right, can literally talk about several folks who have died in their communities, similar or worse than Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. Right. So I think that that's an interesting thing that's happening in regards to resources, and it allows, again, grassroots organizers such as Building Audacity, who we try to be in community with, to actually do the work in a very deep way. Again, we've been doing the work before. It's now we're actually able to get paid for it. Say things like, well, gosh, this could actually cover my rent now. I don't have to work a full-time job and organize. And that's a big statement, right? Because now we're able to do things like take care of ourselves and have health insurance. Audrey Love says self-care is radical, and now we can actually live that truth, right? So I think that's what's interesting about where we are right now. I think the gap in kind of the work is, you know, again, I've been Black a long time, and I've been doing this work a long time. And so what I'm going to offer is, the truth of gentrification, right? And so when, folks, organizers actually start community farms, urban farm settings, a lot of folks are like, oh my goodness, this is great. And then move in and then take that lot away. Right. And so now we have to do the work of actually having a legal team to make it, try to figure out how we could either buy the land or make the land ours. Right. So in other words, access to land is always a gap. Right. The other piece is long term, like the ability to actually think long term. Right. So it's great for right now to have a food rescue or a food grocery program, but that's, again, a Band-Aid, right? Like that's feeding the hungry stomach today. That's not actually feeding the systemic issue of why the hunger exists, right? So what does that even look like? What does that mean? How can we make it so that fresh produce can get in Black and brown hands on a regular basis? Right? How can we always prioritize the most marginalized in a full way? Right. And actually taking the moment to take a step back and do that work and kind of roll up our sleeves and lean in. So I feel like that's the constant gap. But it's one that we have to always be scratching our heads to really understand that it needs to be understood and tackled, because no one needs to be doing food rescuing every day. That's wild and crazy. Right? Like, no, thank you. That's the definition of what is it, of lunacy, of craziness, right? Doing the same thing and and expecting a different result. No, thank you. Right? We want to work real hard and move out of the need to work and kind of move on to something else. And in this very rich country, hunger should not be the thing that I think that we're spending so much time on.
That was so beautifully said. And I want to sort of follow up on that last point of like food rescue seems a bit ridiculous, that it's not something that has built-in longevity, which is one of the things that I think Tufts Food Rescue thinks a lot about and reckons with. So to the point of the infrastructure question, the infrastructure that we at Tufts Food Rescue have access to are like our advisors and our advisory board, which includes like faculty and staff from across the university at Tisch College, at Dining. So we have their knowledge and also funds from TCU and that group to make our work possible. So that is first and foremost one of the things that makes our work happen and possible. To the point of gaps, I think that one of our challenges at Tufts Food Rescue, and I suppose of food rescue more broadly, is like retention of leadership and volunteers. So like there's a 4-year turnover and we leave, it's like student volunteers and coordinators and administrators and like staff and faculty stay. So but students and student volunteers are more community facing. So that's, I think, a bit of a challenge. The people who are interacting with and doing the day-to-day, week-to-week food rescue work and interacting with our like community partners versus like the folks who do a lot of like the planning and facilitation of stuff. So that's sort of like a gap that we have to deal with. And to the point of our community, so at Tufts, I think there are a number of communities here, of course, and I'm in touch with some of them and not in touch with some of them, as are my coordinators and the people on our advisory board. So thinking about which community we're addressing and working with, whether that's low-income students or low-income and food insecure people in the area, is just a constant consideration. And we obviously have to make sure not to speak on the behalf of communities that we are not working in or are part of or have like stake in. So thinking a lot about those things. And again, I'm really liking and sitting with Nikia's points of like sort of the ridiculous and band-aid aspect of food rescue, but I do believe genuinely that food rescue is serving a particular need at this moment, but it is not like the sustainable, the long-term, the vision of food justice that will or should prevail. And that head scratching point is so good. Like we have to just keep revisiting it and dealing with whatever challenges that this sort of imperfect model and imperfect approach to dealing with food insecurity looks like.
Awesome, thank you. That was, yeah, really, really good. I think my next question, really building off of what Nikia was saying, I guess to any of the panelists, how do you feel that food justice fits within wider drives towards social, racial, economic, environmental justice? So yeah, how do you see food justice fitting into other justice movements?
Maybe I'll take a quick stab at that question, if that's okay. So I think the way I think about food justice actually stems greatly from the environmental justice movement. And that as a movement, at least as I understand it too, is framed in part around disproportionate harm. That there are environmental harms suffered by individuals and communities disproportionate to their contributions to those harms. And that's a parallel, I think, with the food justice movement, is that there's harm being perpetrated by the food system, and the most from that harm are suffering disproportionately as a result of those different systemic issues, whether that's racism or the historical legacies of colonialism. So many of the institutions that are set up, like USDA, for example, that have historically disenfranchised Black individuals, Black farmers. So I think that that concept of sort of disproportionate harm and really trying to understand some of the systemic causes behind that is at least one of the ways I think that the EJ movement or environmental justice movement has a really strong sort of parallel with food justice.
So I lean into this question with this constant, it's not a struggle for me. To me, food justice is justice, right? Like, meaning that I get I get nervous when folks segment justice, right? Because it's all bad when you start segmenting folks, as far as I'm concerned, right? We need justice, period. And I see it as this: I can't protest labor concerns if I'm hungry. I can't protest housing concerns if I'm hungry. I can't go to school and focus and fully contribute or contribute at all in the skin that I'm in this meritocracy if I'm hungry, right? So to me, this notion of food is paramount to all the other things, right? As far as I'm concerned. And so what does that mean? That means I think that, the environmental justice movement was started in Warren County, North Carolina, right? Because of the illegal dumping that was happening. And at the same time, we had just gotten the EPA in this country, and Love Canal had just really blown up, and Carter moved all of the white folks from Love Canal out of the community because it was toxic, right? But didn't move the folks from Warren County. And folks didn't actually do anything about Warren County until the Obama administration's second term, not first. Right. So that's like this history of the environmental justice realm. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Black and brown bodies have been suffering from the lack of, solid wages, again, poor housing infrastructure, and definite no good solid food in their community. So their respiratory rates, their lifespans, et cetera, have always been less in this country compared to their white peers. Right. So just sitting in that knowledge and knowing that, again, I'm reiterating my point of, we can't start saying, social justice and environmental justice and climate, like, and segmenting out. No. If I can't eat, if I literally cannot have the nutrition in my body to think and function, then I can't fight. Y'all been hungry one day. Y'all had a hunger pain. You couldn't even do nothing, right? You couldn't even move, right? You had to get a Twinkie, a snack, a glass of water, or something to bite that, right? So where I come to this space and that knowledge is that, right? We all have to eat. We all have to eat, and so if we, as far as I'm concerned, if we kind of start there of like, okay, can we eat? Can we actually get food that allows us to think fully and clearly? And then we can kind of tackle noise pollution, again, housing infrastructure, and all the other things. Then we can party, right? So I'm just throwing that out there of the just taking that one part. Kevin, I think you, of course, offer some great things that I'm not going against. I'm just saying, like, ooh, I can't even go to the social justice stuff because we got to eat.
That was obviously so well said. I think that Kevin and Nakia captured a lot of my thoughts and feelings about the question. One of the ways that I was introduced to the concept of food justice is a movement of movements, and that's something that has stayed with me, just as Kevin and Nakia were mentioning, that there are like overlapping and like sub-movements shrouded in justice and food justice and labor justice. But all of those, not little things, but sort of different things come together in each. Like food justice is a movement of movements. It considers labor justice, racial justice, and environmental justice just as much as environmental justice supports and is like entangled with food justice. So yeah, I really agree with those points, and I think captured everything I would say.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for all of those thoughts and perspectives. I think our next question is more specifically focused on food systems, and in working like towards justice, what ways can we promote and enhance connections within food systems from production to distribution? And that's to anyone in this panel?
I'll just lift some of the things that organizers have already done, right? So here in Boston, Mattapad Food and Fitness, a lot of their youth have done things like put stickers at local bodegas to say, you know, this is a high sugar piece, right? And high sugar leads to diabetes, right? Which is a man-made construct, right? Like to me, that's like a tangible, direct, you know, campaign to inform as well as hopefully reduce high sugar consumption, high sugar beverage consumption of high sugar beverages, right? But and it's not a but, and gosh, could we go deeper? Right? The same reason why there are not liquor stores on every corner in Brookline or Duxbury, yet there are liquor stores all over Mattapan and Roxbury and certain areas of Dorchester. Gosh, how can we go deeper? Right? How can we push for policy change to reduce that? In other words, I'm not totally sold on Kendi's work on anti-racist policies, because I think you have to understand what racism is before you can actually get into the work of building an anti-racist policy. And what I offer though is, how can we all just kind of take that step back and do a 360 and say what looks different here and let's make it same, right? Meaning that if Duxbury is a healthy, going great community, why is it Mattapan? And it's not just because Black people don't want a healthy environment. I promise you that ain't it. Right. So how do we lean in and actually say, no, thank you. Right. So that's kind of my constant thing that I'm thinking about in my organizing. Again, just looking long term, right? Instead of creating another liquor store, gosh, wouldn't this be great to be a hydroponic center? Wouldn't this be great to actually, you know, Baker right now has food trust funding that goes to food trust. That's a great start. How can we go deeper here, right? How can we make the implicit explicit?
Awesome. Thank you, Nakia. We are starting to get some questions from participants, which is great. So this first question is from Eve. And the question is, how do students, like college students, mobilize for sustained food justice that actually creates systemic change and not a Band-Aid effect? And that can be for anyone.
Okay, I can offer some of my thoughts. I think obviously everything we're talking about tonight is like bigger than our individual opinions, but I'm reflecting on an experience I had at a community forum a few weeks ago, where like members of the Black Church Food Security Network in Baltimore, and people in and around Baltimore came to talk about ways that they could advocate for public lands or like city-owned lands becoming agricultural land. So that's like a place-specific thing that is going on between an organization, the people who live in a city, and the people who hope for their vision of food justice to look like having and using land that the city is not using in a way that people find generative or that further food justice in any way. And my point in bringing that example is that there are place-specific initiatives. I'm sure every single where, like at any place you can think of, there's an organization, a group of people who are trying to mobilize and hoping to get energy from people, money, and like commitment to the vision that they're building in order to make whatever like said vision is possible. So that's sort of one example, but I think that's a great question. I'm thinking about it. If I have other thoughts, I'll like pop it in the chat. Yeah.
So again, how I started this of sitting in the Black radical tradition is that, you know, the idea to reimagine is where you start. What do you want to see? What do you really want to see? and what policies actually exist that stop that thing from becoming, and then start tackling that. That's daunting, I know, to say, but man, it's worth asking, right? Like, how do we actually lean in and say, you know what? I think that Whole Foods is on to something, but I can't afford Whole Foods. How do I create my own Whole Foods? How do I do it? Do I lease a building? Do I start hydroponics? What is hydroponics, right? What is aquaponics? Do I, I think it's Siona was talking about, that beautifulness of, gosh, if we had greenhouses, great. How do you literally reimagine, recreate, right? And think outside the box, right? Even though Audre Lorde says there are no new ideas, I think that there are new strategies to tackle these old ideas of freedom, right? Freedom in our food, freedom in how we treat each other, freedom in how we live, right? Be radical in your ideas. And here at Building Audacity, we say things like, be audacious, right? I want you to have the audacity to think outside of what you are presented with right now. I don't think that Nakia, can give you your answer for what you want to see in your community. I think that you have to think about what you want to see in your community and ask other folks, what they want to see where it matches, and roll up your sleeve and get to getting.
Wow, thank you so much for that. That was really energizing. Our next question is going to be to Siona and Margaret from the chat, and that is, were you able to access land that met your needs? And were you able to purchase and own land if you wanted to? And then what do you grow? You might be muted still.
Thank you. For now, we have a place that we rent, but if in future, if we can get a land that we can buy, we'll appreciate it.
Thank you. And do you want to say the names of your farms and what you both grow?
Okay. My farm is a Siona and Family Farm. We grow vegetables, we grow eggplants, tomatoes, pepper, basil, pumpkin, summer squash, collard greens. So I think, and sweet potatoes.
Also, I can add, we grow some greens that our community like bitter leaves, and also they like spinach, they like amaranth, and the corns, the white corns. So that's why if we get our farm, we can rent and at least have a bit of freedom. We can farm round the year with the greenhouses. I think we can buy one. We can appreciate that if we get to know how to go around with one. Thank you.
Thank you.
My
One more.
farm name is Margaret and Family. My farm's name is Margaret and Family, and we are together with Siona in Dracut, and we appreciate the substantial farming for introducing us to that land. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. It was great to hear about everything that you're both growing. So our next question from a participant, with the pandemic crisis disrupting long-held foundations, have any pathways opened or closed in your work? How have the past months shaped both your visions and your day-to-day functions? Anyone can answer that.
we've had to change a lot. So at Building Audacity, we used to, of course, hold space with folks in person. Of course, we can't do that anymore. We have created, again, a whole food delivery program. We've started a school online to provide instruction to folks who decided not to continue public school, as well as provide tutoring support online to folks. We're delivering prepared meals to folks because we've been hearing a lot of things like mom's at work and I'm not eating really until she gets home, or dad or they get home. So in other words, we are trying our very best to hold our community as best we can. The other piece is that farms, of course, are closed for the season. And so we're trying to transition and partner with folks at New Entry to start a new hydroponics center, so we can grow year round, have a CSA year round that delivers to the most marginalized. And we're hoping to, in addition to that, hopefully have a retail component so that folks can actually purchase and offset costs and all of those other things. So again, just reimagining what could be and getting to it.
Fiona, Margaret, do you wish to speak to how the pandemic has affected your work at all?
This year was a bit better. The weather was dry, but last year, COVID, yeah, because the customers were scared when you deliver, things like that.
Thank you. And then one more question is that earlier Siona mentioned tilling. Could you speak more on farming techniques and the importance of soil?
Okay, we're trying to use like it has been a little while. I haven't done the soil test that we're supposed to do, but we try to use some enough of manure that we buy from, what is it? Brookdale Farm in New Hampshire. Yeah, so it used to be sometimes I used to join with NOFA. So we order manure in a box. But I think I will do that this January, see if we can get some manure from NOFA.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just reading the chat for our next question. Which one of these did you want to do, Layla?
Or we could open up the question about how this year has been different with new pathways with the pandemic for real, or Kevin first, if either of you want to speak to that.
No, I was gonna decline, but you tried something else, so he stopped.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. I don't know if something.
It was just a pause. It was just a long pause, Fiona. You weren't missing anything. I can talk a little bit about our season. And New Entry grows food. We distribute food. We buy food from produce or from other farmers and distribute it as well. Can you hear us now? Anyway, and we also have an incubator farm. And the incubator farm supported 11 farm businesses this last year. 6 of them were returning for their second or third year, and another 5 were in their first year. And for those farm businesses, I think it was pretty clear that they were able to change their markets at will, essentially, that because a lot of the farmers markets and restaurant orders that they had worked with had closed down. They were able to do a lot more CSA subscriptions. Some of them were able to do home delivery. And I think one of the advantages of being a small farm who can be adaptable like that is that you can make changes at the last minute, which is what a lot of farmers had to do. And it worked out. I think for a lot of the farmers that we work with, they had pretty great seasons. People were way more interested in having food dropped off at their door than they were in going to the grocery store, if that was an option, right? So for those farmers, it was really a great year. And we also saw that in our ability to kind of purchase some food for our own food hub, where we aggregate and distribute shares of a CSA. And I think on our call tonight is our food hub manager, who might be able to speak in more detail to kind of what COVID meant for our food hub and our markets this year. I don't know, Jacob, are you there?
Hey, I am here. I can just talk for a second. Yeah, this year was really crazy. There was a lot of demand for the CSA. We were also doing a USDA program that involved just delivering like 600 boxes a week to Salem Public Schools up on the North Shore, just north of Boston. And we normally end the season like middle of October, but obviously we're working with Nakia in Dorchester and another organization in Dorchester, the Food Project. So, I mean, obviously like without any real federal support and like continuing benefits for folks, there's just still huge demand. But I would say that I'm super inspired by the work, especially that Nakia is doing. Like every week when I go and drop off all those boxes and I see all the green bags and other random stuff that's going to go into them, it's pretty cool. So we're staying busy, but we've definitely built stronger relationships with folks like Nakia.
Thanks, Jacob. Yeah, there was a Farms to Families USDA program that was launched this year in response to the pandemic. And New Entry participated in that with Boston area gleaners. And we're able to get a few thousands of 10,000, I think, boxes distributed this year, something like that. Which was one significant change. The other thing I just maybe want to point to real quick, because it came up in the chat, and maybe it was in reference to something else, but was like, how do we make this more affordable? And I think what folks experience oftentimes, in especially around the local food system, is that essentially it's less affordable than what other kinds of food you could get that might not be as healthy, might not be as accessible. And how do we bridge that gap in the local food system has been, I think, a big quandary for a long time. And I think one thing remains clear is that the markets on their own are not going to be as sufficient for getting food to the people who most need it. And I think, gleaning opportunities are also a great sort of first response type strategy. And I think Nakia has mentioned a few times too, that there are policies that need to be in place to support farmers and consumers to make a local food system work for everyone. And I think for the most part, and for a while now, the local food systems haven't always worked for everyone. They've worked for the people who could afford it. And I think that's disenfranchised a lot of other people and speaks to the kind of food injustice that I think a lot of this was framed around. So I don't know that I would have any answers necessarily, except that the market alone isn't going to be a sufficient driver for getting food to the people who need it most. So we need to think about other strategies, organizing strategies and policies to help implement some of those changes.
Awesome, thank you. So I think as we are wrapping up, we can have one last question. I think this is a really good one, especially, the title of this event, that we are looking forward to, this just food system that we all want. So the question is, if a common power strategy is to keep the population struggling for the basic needs, such as food, housing, income, natural resource access, appreciation, and create competition for these, then what is the ultimate vision and how do we organize in more effective ways? or magnify effective ways to get to this vision. That's for anyone.
How do we organize to get to the vision? How do we organize to get to food, to equity in our food system? Is that what you're offering? Is that what you're lifting, Beth?
Yeah, I think so.
I think first, anti-Blackness theory, anti-Blackness period is thousands of years old, which allowed for white supremacy culture to exist. And white supremacy culture in these here United States is as old as the country. So to ask the question of, well, how do we get to equality? That's not a question I think we can handle at the last question of the day and in a 30-second kind of framework. But what I do offer is the fact that we name it, that injustice exists, I think is always the first step, right? The same way you tackle strep throat is the same way I think we're going to tackle this thing called oppression, meaning that as soon as you realize you have strep throat, the doctor gives you penicillin and tells you for the first 24 hours you're not, to be around other folks, right? Because you're contagious. Well, welcome to waking, right? I think it's the moment that we recognize we got strep throat, right? And I think 2020 has taught us that in a full way. Most of us, that I wouldn't say all of us, because 8 million people, well, 7 plus, almost 8 million people did vote for not waking up, right? So I offer that for us to get to free, we first need to name that we're not free. And secondly, we need to understand, I think, that lack of freedom it's a double-edged sword. It hurts not just me, but those who are privileged, right? It's expensive. Racism is very expensive. Oppression is very expensive, right? So I think just doing this naming, I think the second piece is, again, what do we really want it to look like? And let's get to it, right? And that's not going to be comfortable at all, but it's necessary. It is necessary work. And I think that that's what needs to happen. I would love for my Black life to matter in 2021 and in 2022. I would love for funders to say things like, oh, last year was gimmicky and cute, and I did the hashtag too, and I'm going to continue it, right? Because organizing costs money. It's not free. Trust me when I tell you that, right? And then I think the third step is, I think, I don't want to mispronounce your name, but Cariel, is it Cariel or Cariel?
It's Cariel, yeah.
Cariel. I think what you lifted of like this transition piece of like, okay, well, I'm doing the good right now, and then next year somebody else is going to roll in, right? So how do we build that legacy? How do we ensure that what you started today is going to continue, right, when you leave, right? And again, in a very explicit way, right? That we say things like, this is a Band-Aid approach and this is the reason why, and this is our goal and our focus to make this thing constantly push at this oppressive system. So again, I think three things I would say is naming, naming, right? Organizing in a way that's clearly pushing in a consistent manner.
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Nakia just shared, and sort of reiterate the idea that there are so many visions for what a particular org, space, community, region can do around like housing justice and food justice and other forms of securing people's well-being and like maintaining their life, for example, that exist and are begging for support. Like individuals, community organizations need money. And one of the ways that I like see that work happening is on social media. A lot of like the farmers, and I'm from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, like have Instagram pages and websites and like GoFundMe's that are pretty active, and people are, I think, increasingly more transparent about their vision and how they want to make that work happen. So I think finding people, organizations that are doing the work that's obviously so vague, but doing certain kinds of work that are aligned with whatever your vision is or the vision that you hope to like come into is a great way to sort of move that along. And my professor shared in the chat, my advisor and professor, that like it will take a revolution, and I think that that's true. Obviously such a massive question and a great one I think Yasha asked. Yeah, that wasn't a complete answer, but I'm thinking and sort of putting stuff together.
Well, that's all the questions we had for tonight. I just want to say thank you so much to all the speakers for all the knowledge and all the calls to action and the continuous learning that needs to continue happen. I also want to say thank you to Melissa for your research and map of Black land loss. And then if people could share words of gratitudes or takeaways of what they learned in the chat, that'd be great. We'll be reaching out with our follow-up email to everyone. And then please check out New Entry and Building Audacity's websites and social media to stay in touch, and consider supporting financially with the COVID solidarity boxes or meeting the other needs of Building Audacity, which include volunteers, books for elementary school students, and food donations for the food program. Thank you again to everyone who came out tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
y'all.